Awesome. Thank you, everyone, very much for joining us for our panel tonight on design for the enterprise. My name is Jessica Lynn. I'm a co-founder here at Workbench, and it is my great pleasure to work alongside our incredible portfolio companies and also our greater community of enterprise startups and corporates here in New York City. Now, the reason why I am personally so excited for tonight's panel is because there are a number of assumptions I want to test around design in the enterprise, right? And one very big mission. So hypothesis number one, everyone in this room has interacted with legacy enterprise software that it is so shitty, it has literally cost you years off your life. Hands up. Yep. So hypothesis proven. This is backed up by blog posts about design in the enterprise called, "If it looks like cows, swims like a dolphin, and quacks like a duck, it must be enterprise software." Just Jason Fried also has a piece very simply titled, "Why Enterprise Software Sucks." But that is also why I am so excited by all of you here tonight, because my second assumption is that every single one of you here believes in great design, and that's why you're here tonight. So quick show of hands, how many of you are designers? All right, very nice. How many of you want to be designers? All right. And how many of you want to hire designers? All right, good stuff. So then my one mission for this panel is to show that the future of enterprise tech is going to be, in fact, largely driven by great design, by great user experiences, by workflows, by user experiences, that is going to change the future of enterprise software, and driven by fresh perspectives and energies from our panelists tonight and from all of you. So a big thank you, round of applause for our designers in the house. And that's also why we're going to get really tactical tonight, right? I'd really want all of you to be able to walk away with at least one thing you can implement with your designers and with your teams tomorrow. So with that, let's kick off with our panelists, our esteemed panelists. If we can go down the row and go name, role, company, a one-liner about your company, and our signature Workbench icebreaker. That is your Pantone color. That is your spirit color. Yes.
My name is Raschin. I'm a product designer at ActionIQ. In ActionIQ, we are enabling marketers to access their customer data without learning any new skills. And my favorite Pantone color, I guess it's yellow, but I speak in hex, so I don't know. What is it?
Awesome.
I'm Kuan. I'm also a product designer at Cockroach Labs, and it's really strange to hear your voice broadcast like this. Cockroach Labs is building the Cockroach DB, which is we're trying to build a database that's like mirrored of both worlds of SQL and NoSQL databases. That means it's strongly consistent, survivable, and super easy to scale. And icebreaker question. Yeah, I use Hex only, so I don't know, like maybe some sort of shades of gray, like EB.
Also a personal favorite. I take no responsibility for that. Hey, I'm Joel. I lead product design at DigitalOcean. We're a cloud infrastructure company, kind of well known for our good design. Did I cover everything except for the Pantone?
What does DigitalOcean do?
What does I just said? Sorry. Yeah, so we have infrastructure as a service software, basically, and we allow developers to host their apps with us. And so the design team is responsible for designing the apps with which developers manage their own apps. Very meta. And I hate everything analog. No, I'm exaggerating, but I think hash ACECAD or so. It's a teal, I think. There you go. Cool.
I'm Jason Grant. I am a senior user experience designer for x.ai. X.ai is a virtual assistant that schedules meetings for you. Kind of interesting. We have a lot of people ask if Amy, who's one of our virtual personalities, is like a real person. No, it is an artificial intelligent algorithm, and we've actually had people come to the office asking to meet Amy. So I find that very entertaining. I'm quite new at the company, only about 3 months, so I'll answer all the panel questions to the best of my new ability. I bought a Pantone colored wallet at one point called India Ink, which is actually a very dark blue, so that's the only Pantone color that I know off the top of my head, so I'm going with that one.
Cool. So, I mean, one thing we'll go into with all of our panelists, but I just want to call out here is that design for the enterprise, we argue, is a lot harder than designing for consumers, right? Because the software that you're building, the workflows, your customers, the scale, and the architecture can be much, much more challenging. So let's kick off with teams, right? All of you, I assume, work with some designer or front-end developer and so forth. And we all know that designers are the sun, and everyone else in engineering and marketing and product revolve around you. But we also know that sometimes in reality is a lot more challenging. So given the cross-functionality of your work, do you have any best practices for how folks who are not designers can best work with you and enable your best work? And Kuan, I know you wrote a blog post about design as a team sport, so maybe we'll kick off with you.
I think at Cockroach, I think we always talk about tactics. The first thing I thought about would be we have some sort of like a company OKR, which is objective and key results, in which I think we all kind of, every department heads, since we're very small, we're still in the 30 kind of employee range, we're still very small. So we have department heads kind of sit together and talk about our annual goals. And surprising, that sounds very simple, but surprising that was like extremely helpful, especially from a design perspective, since I'm only designer, that as a department head, I communicate what's, to me, design-wise is very important in the year. And that got, I think that communicates, you know, what are some of the top priorities, what do I need from other team support. So by going around and like, you know, I hear that from marketing, I hear that from product. So I get a sense of like, how do I balance my own kind of, my own objective versus other teams' objective. So that kind of like get everybody aligned on the same page. And also, I find personally a trick is to ask design to go first in sharing your OKRs, as that kind of like really sets the tone, I think, for the rest of the team to go around and be like, oh, okay. And so they don't kind of impose too much upfront. And then later on, it feels like you are fighting for something. But if you go first, that somehow helps.
Can you share what your OKR is?
Yeah, it's very ambitious. So for 2017, we're talking about OKRs. It means like, what do we want to be in 2018, right? Looking back, what we could have achieved. So for Cockroach, our goal is trying to be the square or the stripe for databases. A lot of our competitors are very traditional, and we want to be that shiny example, like Square for payment or Stripe for payments. And we want to be that shiny example and leading the design excellence for databases. So that's one of them. And then I think my secondary two are kind of growing the team to continue to support the objective number one. And then thirdly would be kind of support, kind of how do we infuse design thinking to the company to empower everybody to be better at their functions. So that's my 3 objectives this year.
Awesome. Raschin?
Sure. So, sorry, I think in an enterprise, a startup environment, we are not short on ideas. And usually when we are working with other teams, we are able to come up with more new ideas. So one of the challenges is the proliferation of the ideas and how to manage them. So I'd like to align the collaboration across team in a way that we can filter these ideas and create a solid base instead of being in the middle of floating ideas. One of the tactics that we are doing, actually, one of my co-workers in design team, she started doing that, and I like it a lot. That I think we just added that into our process is iteration logs, and it's nothing fancy. It's just like a Google Doc, and we start that in the beginning of every project, and we document all of the revisions and iterations in that iteration log. And after each feedback, we just make sure that we document why we make those decisions. This is very helpful to reference to this whenever we want to justify why we are in here, and helping the discussions to avoid diverge. So.
Awesome. Joel, I'm curious your take, especially as DigitalOcean has scaled. So what's your headcount right now from a team perspective?
About 6.
From a design perspective.
From a design perspective.
And then as a company.
From a company-wide, I joined when we were about 60, now we're 270 or so, something like that.
Yeah, so I'm curious how your role has changed as the company has scaled and as a designer team has scaled.
Sure, so I joined as pretty much the first product designer, like UX and UI and all the other terms. And they say like every time your company doubles in size, you have to like relearn how to communicate, and that's definitely been true for us, also within the team. So we've grown from a pretty small product design facet for the team into designers covering every one of our products. And the way you kind of grow into that is different from how you can function when you're like 2 people, right? Because when you're 2 people, it's really easy to be on the same page in terms of design. When you're 6 people, or all of the other people that those 6 people are working with, it's really difficult. It's difficult to keep consistency. It's difficult to have design patterns that span everything that are kind of in sync with each other. One of the things that we've started is daily design reviews. We've been doing them for, I think, like a year now, where one designer brings in a project, kind of this is what I'm working on, this is the kind of feedback I want, and the rest of the team can critique that. Which leads to like a higher standard in terms of design, but it also leads to each designer kind of like, oh, this pattern actually kind of works for me, or this pattern doesn't work for me, and maybe you should think about that. And since each designer is the owner of their product, that can kind of organically lead to a product that scales in a way that makes sense.
And how long is that review every day?
30 minutes every day.
Awesome.
Yeah, it's fun.
I actually have a question. Like you said that you have some brand designers and some product designers.
Yeah.
So is this like across these 2 teams?
We have, okay.
Yeah.
So we have a shared design review channel on Slack where they can share things and we can share things. They sometimes attend our design reviews when we did like color syncs to see if like our new branding colors worked and made sense and were accessible and like all these other things. Then we had kind of shared syncs. Yeah, otherwise we kind of work separately, but anytime that we need each other's take, we have different functions in the company, so it's not as important to get their eyes on our stuff or our eyes on their stuff as long as everything kind of looks similar.
Cool. Let's maybe move to users, because we're about to talk to Jason from x.ai, which has a huge user base for Amy and Andrew. But the question that we often get for enterprise design is that it's really hard to get in front of customers because to get into an enterprise customer often takes a long time. So how do you get user feedback early on? Amy's an interesting use case because you guys technically don't have a traditional interface, so maybe you can speak to that as well, and then we can go back to this.
Okay, you probably picked the worst person on the panel to ask this question because I am.
Because you got the consumer, you got the consumer side to the enterprise.
I'm about 3 months old there and still building a lot of the infrastructure, and one of the things is research. But I guess I'll just maybe tell an interesting story about a new type of enterprise product, what we're kind of calling invisible software. So if our product is doing its job well, you don't really notice it working in the background. And it, for the most part, doesn't have a really tangible interface. So from a user research perspective, one of the things we're grappling with is how do you test a non-tangible interface? Especially one that you can't necessarily get somebody in a traditional user interview or usability test and sit down for an hour, because a lot of our transactions take place over time. So that is something that we set up different practices within the company. It's a very like flat organization, and you can start a practice, which is anybody that wants to get more expertise in Scala or, you know, JavaScript, machine learning, whatever it is. So we're now setting up our user research practice in order to test out different methodologies to get the user input, the customer input we need for an invisible product. So if I ever come back and talk at one of these, maybe you'll hear some really interesting stuff then.
Joel, anything on user research, how you guys think about that at DigitalOcean?
Sure. User research. So I mean, we could definitely be better at user research than we are. We try and have like 10 or so sessions now for every product that we release. In terms,
What makes up a session? Just for the
What? Sorry?
What makes up a session? Is it how many users within those sessions, or?
oh, like one user per session. So usually, like a rule of thumb is if you have 10 users, you'll find 90% of the problems. And we found that to be kind of true. Yeah. What was the question? Just like user testing.
Yeah, the users for the consumer versus users for the enterprise. You guys have also a little bit of both, right? So
That's kind of interesting. So DO historically, I don't think we initially planned to become enterprise, and I don't think we really technically are yet. So we started, we gained our first traction by being really good for the individual developer. So there are a lot of other cloud platforms out there with like a very robust feature set that enterprise companies usually go for. They're like compliant and they have all the things that a company would need. And we had a very minimal feature set. Like we only had virtual private servers, which AWS calls, Amazon Web Services calls EC2. So that's all we had, but we did it really well in terms of design. We made it really easy for a developer to spin up a droplet, which is what we called it. And we gained a lot of traction that way, and a lot of our initial success was from there. And at a certain point, we made a decision as a company to not grow into enterprise, but grow into teams of developers. So that was like the first step. So instead of focusing on a single developer, we're going to focus on a group of them. And those are going to lead to users with higher run rates. But the way that we get to them is going to be through design and through features and through things that really add value, right? And at a certain point, we looked at teams of developers and we're like, okay, we've kind of hit this mark. Let's go over to like startups, small businesses. So I don't know if like in a year we'll be like, okay, we've kind of put our flag here. Let's go over to enterprise. But it's been like a clear progression, and every milestone we've kind of decided to progress to the next using design and building feature set that kind of encourages the kind of use that we want.
awesome. Thanks,
That
Joel.
answers the question.
Well, Raschin, I'm going to jump to you then, because you're building a product for CMOs, the marketing org, right? How are you going about and testing your product and getting feedback and getting in front of the customers?
These are not CMOs.
Oh,
they
sorry,
are
it's for the
marketers,
marketing
yes.
suite, yeah.
Yeah, but so you pointed out what are the differences between B2B and B2C in terms of user testing. I can think about two differences. One is, I forgot the number one, but number two is when we are designing business application, it's very important to understand that these will be the tools that ended up in the workspace. So all of the satisfactions and the frustrations during the work hours rapidly intensifies in the tools that we are designing. So there are a lot of times that people blame a tool because something is not working out, or you may get promoted because of the tool that you're using. So there's a huge difference in here, and I will come back with the first one that I just forgot.
Cool. Well, we can talk about, I think, scale, right? And so we all know that really great design is deceptively simple, and if it's really simple and pleasant to use, and that's the equivalent of 1,000 tears from a designer, right? It's really hard work to get to something that effortless. So curious, maybe Jason and Kuan, as you're thinking about building more features, how do you avoid feature creep? How do you avoid what we sometimes see in legacy software, which is Band-Aids on top of Band-Aids on top of Band-Aids until it's a kind of a hot mess?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it's always going to be a balance. I don't think you will never be able to avoid, Band-Aid situations since you're a startup and your direction changes so much. But one thing, I guess, I would say, first it was kind of like a metaphor that I've heard lately that I really enjoyed, was my music teacher, start talking about this idea, great symphony built on really simple rhythm. Mm-hmm. A great composer always find a really simple rhythm first, and then the symphony just grow out of there. So I think probably to me, when I first heard it, I was thinking about design systems. And I was been thinking about, maybe it's much easier to start small and build a really small component first, and then to kind of flexibly using that component over and over to build other modules. So that way, when you change something, you only change one module, but that kind of ripples to the entire system. So that's kind of one thing lately I've been thinking a lot about. And the other thing, I guess, is just aligning the entire team and the company on a vision is super, super important. I think we can really employ design, thinking, design skills in really facilitating those conversations. If, we only build as far as we can see it, right? If we can see it 2 years down the road, we build for that vision. And if we can align on the vision, the entire department builds together. So in startups, maybe 6 months is too aggressive. A year impossible, but 6 months is probably a good place to start. So if we can get everybody in a room using some sort of design negotiation skills and get on the same page, whatever tool you use, agree on the vision, then it's less likely it's going to be bended down the road.
Cool. Well, I'm curious how many engineers are here tonight. How many developers do we have? Okay, and how many, I guess, in sales? Right, because we only had a few developers here. And this also goes to you, Joel, because I know you worked on a project called Design and Code, right? Where you were teaching designers how to code and teaching developers how to design. And Kuan, you being the only designer, are there any best practices in talking with developers and maybe, educating them, training them on design thinking? Have you done workshops? What's the right way?
So I think also we've been kind of lucky to have developers with kind of a product mindset. And I think they actually hire for that within the engineering teams, because we are known for this, and DigitalOcean knows we're known for this. Some things that we do as a design team, both to build trust and to kind of build everyone is fighting for the same goal versus uphill battles against engineers, is first including them in every product kickoff. So we do a thing called design studios, which if anyone's heard of a Google Ventures design sprint, it's kind of a mini that over a couple of hours. We just do divergent and convergent thinking and throw ideas against the wall, and then they've kind of become part of the project. Another thing we do just to increase transparency around our work is a bi-weekly product design Gazette, we call it. And that includes all of the work that we've done over the past 2 weeks. And it's not just hey, look at this pretty mock-up. It's here's the thinking that went into it. Here's the findings from user testing here. Here's a cool thing that we've been thinking about for the future and so forth. So people it's become the favorite email within the company, and the way actually people find out about a lot of features that we're shipping versus the product emails that are sent out. Just because it's very visual. I think just work together on things. Engineers are creative problem solvers as well. They just solve different problems in slightly different ways. Often the best solution can come from them.
I'm just going to ask one more question, and I want to really open it up. And this is around success. And Kuan, you touched on this earlier around OKRs. Have you guys, in your experience, whether in your current job or in previous roles, measure success for enterprise design differently than you would, let's say, for a consumer product or even at an agency? Right? How do you really define success? And if you're going to be the Square of databases, are there metrics against that you can measure?
I would just kick off this conversation since you're talking about Square for databases. I think about there's definitely something very abstract and very subjective about design that's very hard to measure. You can probably measure brand perception, but over a long course period of time. But one thing I was actually just talking about someone about this today is one bar we can hold ourselves for is if we're evaluating ourselves against Square or against Stripe, we can ask ourselves, is this a product that Square or Stripe comfortably shipping? So that was kind of a question that grounded us along the way. And then I think, so that's something that's still very subjective, but it kind of give everybody some sort of a scale of whether or not this is an MVP for a product. And then the majority of design success, in my view, are very much product success, are very much marketing success. Have people used our product, and how many steps have someone taken to download or use our product? How many support emails we have to answer every week? And those are design metrics as well. So I think they blend a lot. I don't know if I have a good answer to that, but I just feel how do these departments work together to, really go for the same goals?
Yeah, I agree. I think it's definitely a blend between different teams. When we're talking about good design, you're talking about happy customers, you're talking about good engagement, and this is definitely a KPI and a measurement for product and marketing.
Jason, anything to add?
I always have to check that it's on. Yeah, so I am kind of coming in at, like I said, a weird point in the product development. It's a 2-year-old product, and being pretty much the only designer on the team, I'm starting out by benchmarking all of our current experiences, both quantitatively and qualitatively. So I also made some sort of 2017 manifesto for design within the organization, so that I have these benchmark numbers to compare to over time as we go through redesigns, new feature additions. So that's something that I'll kind of be using as my guiding light throughout the year, is have I moved those numbers forward. And we have, as we're trying to aggressively scale, we obviously have revenue numbers, churn numbers, and conversion as a pretty big tangible goal to hit. So my thinking is if I can put a number to the success that design has brought to the organization, I can ask for a very big raise at the end of the year. So.
Joel, you want to?
Sure. So I mean, like it was said before, it's kind of fuzzy and hard to measure good design. You can measure quantitatively conversion, right? You can measure adoption of a certain product. If you're trying to get close to things and measure actual success of the design and interface, you can measure how fast does it take someone to complete a task, right? But none of that really tells you if the design is successful, right? If how fast someone completes it doesn't say is it intuitive, or are they enjoying their, or are they just so fast because they want to get it over with, right? Maybe they spend more time and they enjoy the experience more. So it's hard to get at those things using just data. Really qualitative feedback from user testing and interviews can come in handy in telling whether a design works. We also track Net Promoter Score, and we tag different answers in the survey with design. So if we see more promoters and good scores are tagged with design, we're doing a good job. If we see people posting on Twitter oh man, this awesome experience from DigitalOcean, which we often do see, we know we're doing well. And if we see people like are frustrated with someone, which we also do see, then we know like we could be doing better. But it's super fuzzy.
Awesome, guys. Questions? Okay. You, sir.
Does anybody need that? These guys touched on, I guess, some level of corporate communication, intercommunication with the development staff. How do you guys kind of put that all together from a goals perspective? There are corporate goals, and you can measure the success of a particular product set in those metrics. Well, how much revenue did it generate, right? It's not always about, I mean, the customer's always supposed to be happy, but the shareholders are really supposed to be happy. So how do you guys kind of measure your design metrics within the confine of sprints? Right, you guys are going out and you're sending out MVP product. Maybe it's not going to be the greatest product that goes out there. You're going to put some development dollars into that. So how do you guys, I guess the real question is, how do you guys manage the communication? And do you do it in sprints? Because I always thought that would be a great way to do it. The developers are already using sprints. You guys are now using design sprints. I'm trying to incorporate sprints from a corporate development perspective and put those all together. I know it's not the regular question, but you guys covered tons and tons of stuff.
Take something on. Okay. Once again, all right. I think this is always a debate about where designers fit within an organization. And I've actually found success in somewhat integrating them into the engineering or development process, right? I've tried to do it like in parallel, but I think you do have to be a little bit ahead of it, and then also have a separate workflow for very future forward stuff, or like I said, more design studio type of stuff where you're ideating for 3, 6 months, a year out. But by integrating, somebody talked about working towards a common goal, right? If you structure an epic, there's always a design component and a dev component, so you're always working towards a common goal, right? So being able to integrate design within the development team itself or engineering, I think kind of marries those goals or those metrics together versus having a completely separate path. You can add very design-specific KPIs into that, but I think making it a very separate discipline goes back to probably the first question about, how do you integrate design into a culture as well? You integrate it into a culture. You don't always keep it a separate track.
Awesome. So we'll take two more questions, and we'll see. Yes, sir.
How do you quantify and
Great question. The heart of enterprise software.
Yeah, quantifying like user dissatisfaction is tough, right? We use user voice, which is just like a way of letting users air their grievances basically in a public forum and upvote other grievances. And so that's a way to tell how many of our users want something changed or have this similar point of frustration. The real answer is like unless executive stakeholders are really bought into this idea of design is important and not just for the sake of like, let's paste a nice skin on top of this, it's just not gonna happen, right? So we're lucky in having executive leadership now that truly understands that the experience is where we win, right? And you know, designers are great and we do great work, but unless stakeholders are gonna like back it up and be like, you know, this is really important, then you can't do that. And that takes like a bit of a leap of faith, right? You don't have numbers. It is this kind of fuzzier thing. So what we're doing right now is an exercise of like having a customer experience roadmap for 2017. And so we're prioritizing features and like actual like technical overhauls of things that are just gonna allow for easier, like literally add 0 new functionality, 0 new features, but allow for better workflows. Because we understand the moment that we lose in design, we've lost.
One way you can quantify this is how users are self-sufficient and how much they need to call the support team or other resources in your company in order to get their job done. So if they are not able to do that, if they are calling the support team every day, then probably it's a good reason to redesign.
Yeah, that's awesome.
I guess like one little thing I will add to that would be like I was like very interested about this idea of like redesign. Like I think every time we try to redesign something, we have to go back to the drawing board. Like, okay, why are we redesigning? Like, what is the redesigning actually for? So I think if we can get like everybody aligned on a goal again to like see, okay, the redesigning, is it leading us closer to that vision we agreed upon? And that helps as well.
Awesome. Any designers have a question? Yes, ma'am. Yeah, it's a great question. Yeah, where your backgrounds were and how much tech did you learn and development did you learn along the way?
Industrial design background into product design and digital design, and I realized that I need to learn a lot from software development in order to get design done.
Yeah, I had a journalism and design background. I don't personally do a lot of like development work, and then especially find it challenging to design for a database. So I've just been reading up a lot and just kind of catching up and talk to our engineers like, hey, I don't really know what this graph you are talking about. Like, why do you need this graph again? Like, explain to me. Like, I'm 5. So yeah, it's been difficult, and then but I think it just like takes longer. That's probably another challenge for enterprise as well. You need to understand the technology to design it better. So yeah.
Sure. I've been designing and coding since I was like 12, so maybe not the best answer for this. Jason we were like all talking downstairs earlier, and he said like this is the kind of field that you can get into in any way. Yeah. Really think like industrial design and architecture are really good places for like UX designers to come out of, because it's less so the tools and like knowing how to code and knowing how to make things pretty, and it's a bit more knowing how to think about problems the right way. And that's something like that can be learned. It takes experience, but yeah.
Agreed. So I have a digital design, or mostly interaction design background, and then at some point added a bunch of other skills that now is called UX. So, but I did work as a front-end developer for a while, mostly out of frustration of not being able to build what I had designed. I actually have some fairly strong opinions about whether designers should be knowledgeable about code, and I'm actually on the yes side. Reason being is going back to the architecture thing, you know, you can design a pretty facade, but if you have no idea if the thing would be structurally sound or how it would actually get built, well then it's a pretty picture. It's not something that could ever be made. And I work with a lot of designers in past experiences that obviously come from a print background, because they have no idea how something will scale, and they micro design that page to be exactly as it is without any error states, without new records being added to anything, without any changes over time in the UI. And I said that's probably because they don't know the infrastructure about how something's built. So I think it helps to inform your designs. Having said that, the world of front-end development has moved so rapidly over the past 5 to 7 years or something. Like, my skills are super outdated, but I have enough of a background to pretend like I know what I'm talking about. So.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to end on one last note that I have actually from Kuan when we had lunch earlier, where she said I asked her why she went into enterprise design, previously at Etsy and so forth. And she said she wanted to tackle something hard, to not get bored, and that to design a database that engineers love would be a huge accomplishment. So I feel like that is the heart of what they're doing for enterprise software. So again, a huge round of applause for our amazing designers. And we should have plenty of beer if you guys can stick around for some questions. And thanks again, guys.